Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we are reviewing The Amazing Spider-Man number 45. So, this was an interesting one. I had a bunch of stuff pulled this week, and for those of you that watch our streams week to week, you'll know this wasn't actually on the list, but usually when I go into my comic book store, I pick up a few extra things, and one of them ended up being Amazing Spider-Man number 45. And so far, the way we've been doing these week to week streamy reviews is I just do them in random order. So, Amazing Spider Man 1 out. I did not know that was on. 1 second. Oh, that's my old phone. Okay. Ironically, that's my old phone notifying me that my stream is online. I'm just going to turn off the ringtones so that doesn't happen again. My regular phone is working just fine. Oh, I see. I'm just going to move that over so it looks a little better. No, don't do that. Go. There we go. Okay. Sorry. So for those of you that saw my review of The Amazing Spider-Man number 44, you know I didn't like it that much. I talked a lot about the pros and cons of Nick Spencer's writing. I still maintain I appreciate his era of Spider-Man writing more than Dan Slott's. He also has great artists like Ryan Ottley, or in this issue, Bagley. What's his face? Mark Bagley, who's written Spider-Man comics from like the Ultimate Spider-Man era, so that's really cool to see him around. John Dell and Andy Owens did inks. David Curiel did coloring. He does a lot of Spider-Man coloring, I believe, and you know it's very simple, but he's a good Spider-Man colorist because he does a great job at bringing out the red and blues of Spider-Man. Oh, you know we had those bars up because I'll do this as we're talking, but yeah. So to me, the Sins Rising prelude just reflects a lot of the stuff going on leading up to the Sins Rising plotline, where it's just a bunch of the same build up over and over again. And I was getting really tired of it, and that's all that the prelude issue felt like it was about. We just got more hints of stuff to come, this mysterious villain. Like not the Sin Eater, but the bug guy that keeps tormenting Spider-Man. They said his name a couple of times, and I always forget it. So that's a great sign of a memorable villain. Ha ha ha. So like off to a great start already, and I've heard weird rumblings about him being like alternate Spider-Man or something like that. I don't know if it's true, but it certainly seems to involve the Ultimate Spider-Man based on how the Prelude issue ended. So whatever's going on with that, there's certainly questions to be had. But regardless, I saw this issue, and after looking around at what was out, I ended up picking this up just to see what we'd get. Things open up with, and it won me over almost right away. I thought like, oh man, this might end up being the best part of the comic, because we open up with narration from Carly Cooper. And she's been around in the Nick Spencer era a little bit. I maintain that I find Nick Spencer writing this character a lot better than Dan Slott. Carly Cooper feels a lot more human, and even though Nick Spencer, like in this book's just rehashing what's happened to her so far, as her history as a character mostly in this little intro thing, it really brought me more into her character than I was used to from before, because like I got it. She was like, okay, like I understand. She kind of got to like I don't know. I got the better sense of how important her father was to her, which I never really got out of Dan Slott's things. And I was thinking like all this stuff about Carly Cooper was established in Dan Slott's era, but it felt relatively flat. Like there wasn't a lot of personality to it or something. There's something about Dan Slott's writing that's very shallow and hollow. And Nick Spencer, for all his faults with Spider-Man's writing, is good at that, bringing out the human side of things. And that's early on what I really liked about his Spider-Man writing, and I kind of found it in here too. So Carly talks about how she ended up getting a job back on the NYPD, and Mr. Box says it's damn nice to see Bagley back on the main Spider-Man comic. You know, that might be part of what makes this book great, because he brings out the humanity in all these characters to a great deal, and that works really well with Nick Spencer's writing. I don't think, maybe Bagley did draw for Dan Slott at some point or another, but I doubt the effect would be the same thing. And obviously, I don't even remember what if that happened. Like, I could have read those comics and I have no memory. But man, I don't know. Uh, Bagley's a good Spider-Man artist. So, anyways, then we cut to Peter Parker basically going on a date that he had planned out with Mary Jane, but she had to cancel on him, and now he's just watching a Shakespeare play on his own, talking about nightmares he's been having that are cryptically hinting at things to come. He kind of talks about how he does have a good set of friends and family, and he's surrounded by good people, but he feels very alone. It's actually done really well. There's a version of this exact type of narration and inner monologue that's a very mopey Peter Parker. And yeah, he is arguably moping, but I could really, I felt him. I was like, oh, that happens to people. That's happened to me before, and it's a feeling I could relate to very easily. So it didn't feel like a miserable drudge through, like, oh, everything sucks for Peter Parker, the guy with the most fantastical powers in the world. It's like, no, he's going through something, and his powers wouldn't just make those personal issues and like feeling down go away, and that stuff's done really well. But it gets interrupted, and Overdrive shows up. Now this is where, right on this page, pretty much. I think this is the second page of third, but still. And there's a bunch of his scenes in here. What's this actually starts to make me like the prelude a little bit more. I still maintain that prelude doesn't hold up well on its own. It's very flat. There's really nothing to it. That's part of my negative review of it when we were looking at it a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying like I didn't get anything out of this, and I wasn't excited to read Sins Rising. I feel like the events of that book should have been just sort of covered in maybe the last Spider-Man story arc near the end or something, because it's just a dream that Spider-Man has anyways, and that could have been conveyed better. Because once Overdrive shows up in here and Peter starts having the vague memories of that dream, it's a cool moment. It had me going like, oh, okay, like now we're following up on this. That wasn't just random nonsense, which I honestly thought it was at the time. And you'll forgive me for thinking that, but Spider-Man's been a certain way in the comics for a long time, and that's where my instincts go. It's nice that Nick Spencer didn't go in that direction, and he's really following through on things, because basically the same, like the logic or the story of Spider-Man's dream is happening again, even if the specifics are different. Overdrive's being chased by the Sin Eater. He doesn't really understand what's happening. He's panicking and being kind of cryptic. Spider-Man's trying to help him, but this time they're in like a public road full of people. And this is a really cool scene, and most of the preview images that I always just pull the preview images when we do a print review. They're featuring this scene. I don't think they're gonna convey well unless you like really pause and zoom in on all these little text balloons and stuff. The fear of this scene. It's kind of cool because yes, it is taking place at nighttime, which is pretty typical for like scary scenes and stuff, but it's so well lit. Like, obviously that's just a function of coloring and stuff, but that's where I kind of mentioned earlier how what's his face, Curiel, I believe. Yeah, David Curiel has been doing a lot of coloring for Spider-Man, and he really shines here. This is a very brightly drawn, I guess we'll say, scene where like the street lights and the lights of the city are clearly illuminating everything that's happening. So the atmosphere isn't scary of in itself, but Spider-Man's thoughts and him being like, well, first of all, he's thinking, he keeps like having to snap himself out of things and being like, this isn't a dream this time. We got to pay attention. Like he's thinking that to himself and keeping himself going. that's really kind of a cool way to make things creepy because like the car at one point tips over and Spider-Man has to pull these kids out, but he hesitates because of all that dream stuff. That's good suspense and it's kind of scary. And then the better layer of that is when Spider-Man starts seeing the Sin Eater chasing after Overdrive and appearing in the crowd. And the first thing Spider-Man says is, "Please don't be him. Please don't be." And then he gets interrupted and he has to resume those thoughts later. Like, I don't want to. Or is it? Yeah, like he he at one point says like, "I didn't want to believe." He's perfectly aware that villains come back to life all the time, but he says to himself, "I didn't want to believe that he could come back because it ain't a good it wasn't a good story with the Sin Eater. He murdered Jean DeWolf, a longtime Spider-Man character." And they kind of dig into all of this in a good flashback, which by the way is great to see, like Mark being able to draw all these classic Spider-Man moments. That's good use of like a legendary Spider-Man artist. And I'm starting to really get sold on this book at this point because we've got all these selling features that I hadn't really considered or even thought would be in here. So they sell us on Sin Eater's character, and if you don't care about um, this particular villain in Spider-Man comics, this is by far the best book I could think of to do that. And so they tussle. Spider-Man basically loses the fight because he's dumb. Like it's not like that. Sin Eater is back from the dead, and Spider-Man doesn't know the full story, so the villain's able to trick him into holding back enough that Sin Eater's able to like headbutt him, um, get some distance between him and Spider-Man basically, and then shoot at Overdrive, who's running away. Spider-Man, being Spider-Man and having a spider sense, dives into the way and actually gets into the path of the gunfire, but it appears to harmlessly travel through him, which suggests to me it's like, oh, like, well, based on stuff Sin Eater says later, like, well, whatever's going on with Sin Eater, first of all, there's clearly magical stuff happening to him, and he seems very much back from the dead and talks about coming back from hell, which isn't much of a bluff in the world of Marvel. And anyways, the bullet goes straight through Spider-Man harmlessly and right through Overdrive, killing him. And, Spider-Man reacts as he would. And, he shouts no. He's like, well, whatever Overdrive did, he didn't deserve it. Sin Eater talks about how Overdrive, like, killed all these people in this unsolved murder that Spider-Man actually heard about on the police radio and stuff. Um, which is unclear if he did it or not, but it seems, based on the panicky nature of Overdrive unwilling to acknowledge his stuff, that's the case. I hate Tevye. He was saying Sin Eater sounds more demonic. Oh, for sure. And then Mr. Bad Box is saying Sin Eater's new power set is quite interesting. Yes, he has shown up, I think, in the, if I'm remembering right, the Axis Carnage tie-in as basically something similar to this. Sort of like this demonic back from the dead villain kind of thing. And he's kind of consistently written from them, where it's clearly mentally unstable, and he's clearly got some crazy demon powers going on. There's a lot of surrealness to this villain. I quite like him, I will say. Tevye saying I completely forgot about Axis. Yeah, most people did, but I liked it, and I remember it quite well. So, Sin Eater basically just vaporizes before Spider-Man's eyes and says, well, I'm not supposed to kill you. That would be the one who summoned me. Clearly the main bug-themed villain. And Spider-Man just stands over Overdrive's corpse. He leaves the scene as the police come and take his body away. I say that because it's kind of important. And Spider-Man just sort of thinks to himself about not knowing, like, what Sin Eater wants or where he'll turn up next. He can tell, even from his perspective as a character, that this is only the start of something much bigger and that someone's behind all of this. And we get the one proper appearance of Bugman. Spider-Man kind of swings off and just he's like, well, wherever Sin Eater goes, death follows. So like, he's understandably concerned. This guy kills people left and right. Oh, Kindred is his name. Tevye says, yes, I get reminded almost every stream with Spider-Man, and I forget. Like, that's not a great sign. That's not a super memorable name. It doesn't help that none of these issues bring it up. But whatever. Last scene, we cut back to Carly Cooper, and she's actually revealed to be doing the autopsy of what I can only assume is Overdrive, because his bullet wound is gone, and she's baffled by this because she saw it when it came in. And if you go back to the page where he shot, like half his chest is like burst, or not like burst open, but there's a lot of blood. Let's put it that way. And it would have been like it was from a rifle. It was a big gunshot wound. But he's unharmed. He opens his eyes and gets up, freaking Carly right out, and Overdrive right along with her. So, and that's the end of the issue. So Tevye, I didn't see at the beginning of the stream, but I was talking about how I never really cared much about Carly Cooper, but Nick Spencer's definitely brought out a more human side to her, and she wasn't an unwelcome presence in this story. This is a kind of Carly Cooper, or I don't know if I'd really care about her dating Spider-Man. This book is interesting in the wake of me kind of, I don't know, Carly's character's still just okay. But this was a good use of her character as like a medical examiner and freaking out at someone coming back to life. Tevye was saying it came more about Mary Jane and Peter Parker. Well, that's clearly an issue at hand within this book. Mary Jane hasn't appeared in person in a lot of these comics in a while, but she's clearly a focus of interest. I don't really know what's going on. The way they keep talking about MJ and Peter, it's almost like they're building up towards a marriage. And I don't know. I don't think dragging this out would be a good idea. I kind of get the instinct because we would want... Like, here's the thing. When Peter and Mary Jane first got married, it was pretty sudden and not built up much. It was all in the course of one book. But the thing about that is, that was a pretty good book. And we reviewed it, and it kind of dealt with them kind of rushing into this and thinking about that and deciding ultimately to just sort of go for it. They've known each other for a long time, and they wanted to do this. And things pretty much worked out until a demon came and got in the way. I don't know if Nick Spencer's building up to changing things or something like that, but I've talked about on other streams how Marvel's kind of lost an opportunity for a while to deal with this, or at least they have to reconcile with the fact that everyone's going to compare them to the whole family of Batman and Superman that's kind of going on right now. But the more I think about it, the less I feel Marvel has families among their superheroes, proper families, and like family units along the lines of Spider-Man being a husband and father. And I'm not necessarily against that, even if it is similar to a slight degree with Superman and Batman. But regardless, I think it still does a good job at just telling a Spider-Man story. These larger things with Mary Jane and stuff like that will matter to Spider-Man long term, but I didn't hate this book, and I certainly liked it a lot more than issue number 44. Teddy was saying Amazing Mary Jane got cancelled. That's fine. Maybe that has to do with why she's off on her own for a while. If so, that feels kind of unnecessary, but I don't know. There's nothing wrong with Mary Jane being a Spider-Man character. If Marvel feels they want to, or I don't know, needs to have more female-focused books and that sort of thing, they can do that. Mary Jane can still be a part of Spider-Man's life, because there's been periods of time where 4 or 5 Spider-Man books are running at the same time, so who cares? And I don't know. I don't think Mary Jane's the type of character that works standing alone as well. That might not be true. I could be wrong about that, but I'm thinking about her time working with Iron Man and stuff like that, and there's nothing wrong with viewing her or keeping her as a Spider-Man character. Compare that to, say, Lois Lane, and the Lois Lane miniseries was awesome. I haven't read every single book, um, but what I have read, I've liked. It felt like a bright, shining star amidst the Bendis era of Superman, because it wasn't written by him. And I really, really liked that series. And I think because she's a journalist, because she has these connections beyond Superman and her own solid foundation of something that offers a story, namely her role as a reporter, it works. Plus, there's that whole tension and stuff going on with her as a mother and a wife and stuff like that. So there's more to offer, I think, than the Mary Jane story. Mr. Box would say the Mary Jane comic had great art, but a lousy script. It certainly had very strong art. I haven't read much of it, so I can't speak to the writing, but I never really took much of an interest because of all the stuff I just said. Tevye was saying, personally, I would love the return of Spider-Girl, Mayday Parker, the daughter of Peter Parker and Mary Jane, which he's referring to from the MC2. Yeah, you know, everything I just said about Mary Jane doesn't really apply to Mayday, who I felt really stood well on her own and really drove a series for like almost 100 issues or so. She was great. Tevye is saying, the one issue I didn't like about Lois Lane was the story with teen John Kent, Superboy, because it really, yeah, okay, you've, you know, said your piece on that before. Who knows? Bendis is leaving Superman. They might not commit to that anymore or something. Yeah, so overall, Amazing Spider-Man number 45 is a strong and solid foundation for a new story arc that could be interesting. If you can't tell from some of the stuff I was saying earlier about like Spider-Man's relationship with Mary Jane, the nature of Kindred, that bug villain, and his relationship with Sin Eater, both of who, like Sin Eater already having been a pretty mysterious, surreal, and mysterious character, there's enough going here that could be a strong Spider-Man storyline. I say could be because Spencer could fall flat on his face. He could have nothing going on here. I really don't know. There's not enough to this book to say that. But, like I said earlier, if you want to maybe like Sin Eater for the first time and want to be sold on the character, as I mentioned earlier, yeah, like this book does do a good job at selling you on Sin Eater and this story if you're kind of sitting on the fence. There's some really cool little details and stuff in here and some strong potential overall. Okay, Tevye said something I was thinking. That he agrees this story was really interesting, and I'm hoping that he is hoping Kindred could be Carly Cooper, or maybe it's Jean DeWolf. It occurred to me she might be Jean DeWolf or something like that. Someone floated the idea of it being an alternate Spider-Man because they showed a bunch of characters along the web of life at the end of the Prelude book, and I talked about that a little earlier. I still think that's like, in spite of it not being the most original idea in the world, that's like a pretty solid bet. Carly Cooper would be more interesting, but her turning full villain again is a little questionable. That kind of was the end of her character last time around. It might not be the best. Like, if they do that again, that turns her character into some kind of joke, right? I feel. uh, it's interesting how certain writers can fail upwards. Uh-oh. I'm getting some buffering signs here. But it appears to still, yeah, okay, we're still working. Anyways, oh yeah, Tevye was saying, oh, it froze. Okay, well, I paused during the freeze, so I guess we're good. Oh shoot, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so it's interesting how like a writer like Bendis can just kind of coast along. But to be fair, if you look at his books or a lot of the reviews of his stuff from even random readers on Comic Book Roundup, they kind of show, oh, what am I like? They like him. There's a huge contingent of people that really like Bendis books, even the ones that I think are just garbage. That it seems within like my circle of friends and critics, everyone hates. There rarely is a consensus like that across the entire comic book community, and different pockets of people include some that really like Bendis. I struggle to see why sometimes, and let's not go too far in that direction. Although to be fair, Bagley and Bendis worked together on Spider-Man for a long time, but you know, it comes and goes and stuff like that. So maybe that's kind of what's reminding you of it. He did a great job on Ultimate Spider-Man, but yeah, I think we're getting a little off again, and I just don't care about, if Bendis is going to take over a series or a character, I'm just going to stop reading it. Okay. I tried to get us back on topic, but it brought up another thing I was going to say, because that's a mistake I think some people will make, is they'll commit hard to a series like Amazing Spider-Man, and I do that sometimes. I'm a big Spider-Man and X-Men fan, and will pretty much want to clue in, even if I know it's going to be trash sometimes. Uh, but it's not always the best solution. If Bendis is going to take over a character or series I like, the best solution for me is to probably just drop it until he leaves again. Um, at least personally, it should also be noted that I'm a lot more willing to buy a book, and I've talked about this before, just because as a reviewer, I feel there's like it's easier to excuse it for myself. But just because I bought this book doesn't mean you guys need to. I always encourage people, and have since like I first joined Comic Island, to vote with your wallet and such. Uh, which doesn't mean I buy every book, and sometimes I will avoid true garbage like The Plague, or if there's a writer who I just don't want to hear from. There was a Mark Millar book I saw on the comic book shelves, and I just passed that right over, so happy that I didn't feel obligated to buy it. But yeah, and then the other side of that though is, I was not at all enthusiastic to buy Amazing Spider-Man number 45 here. In hindsight, I'm very glad I did, because it improved my story, or my opinion on the current direction of Amazing Spider-Man and this particular story arc quite a bit, which is a great thing. So there is value in sometimes checking out stuff that you might otherwise have written off. Every book changes, and yeah, I find that sometimes series aren't necessarily so predictable, or sometimes a story arc that's been mediocre or kind of boring can really kick into gear randomly in one issue when they are revealing a big burn change or change in storyline overall of some kind. Um, okay, Tevye and Bad Mr. Box started talking about Amazing Spider-Man a little bit, which is fair because Bagley wrote like 100 issues of it. Um, Tevye is saying that like Ultimate Spider-Man still holds up from Bendis, but his current work is terrible, and that's true of a lot of stuff with Bendis. And even up to until present day, he has these gems every once in a while. Uh, and his earliest stuff is kind of his best, like Jessica Jones, like or Alias will say, and Daredevil. But as he got more prolific and more, say, powerful, able to command bigger characters and more tentpole titles within Marvel and later DC, he got much worse, and is a solid example of a writer who's better working on a smaller scale or in more focused series. Bad Mr. Box then said Ultimate Spider-Man was okay the first 2/3 of the run, then it went down the drain hard. It did drop off after a while, but it did have moments throughout. It depends on what you define as Ultimate Spider-Man, because that story line, or that series, just ran and ran and ran and ran all the way up until the end of the Ultimate Universe, so to speak, in Secret Wars. So if you're talking about that whole time frame, then I agree. If you're talking about the Bendis Bagley run, I pretty much like the whole thing up until Mark leaves, pretty much, actually. Um, Bad Mr. Box says, if Spencer keeps this tone and Bagley stays on the art, this run will be solid. I agree. Tone's a funny thing in this book, because Spider-Man and horror are always an interesting mix, but I think Nick Spencer and Mark Bagley kind of nail it in here. They get the right amount of creepy and surrealism without being overblown, which could easily have been done, and without it being like atonal for Spider-Man. He's still like a light-hearted character, but he's not like quipping at Sin Eater too much either, because there is a little bit of fear there. And Spider-Man is both afraid and also murderously furious at this character. It's a very interesting mix, and I like the tone it strikes overall. It's well designed, even if it has quite a few different things going on between like comedy and horror and drama all at once, and you know, romance too. I guess when we're talking about Mary Jane, it bridges all of that for a cool overall story. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, now you guys are just talking about random stuff you want. Like I could tell you saying that there's different directions they could go. Sometimes what people want as readers isn't necessarily what's best for the character, which is why I kind of have been broaching that in the context of the larger comic book market. And once they pull that trigger, it's hard to undo it, as they learned with One More Day. Although I still maintain people would have probably been fine with it if Mary Jane and Peter Parker just got divorced. This story arc and this ongoing stuff and question about whether or not Peter's going to propose to Mary Jane again would feel far less egregious if they were divorced and if it weren't ambiguous about what exactly happened in their marriage and what is and isn't canon from One More Day and all those retcons they later did. I really don't like One More Day. I am on board with you and what you're saying and chat there, Tapia, but I do think there's a limit to the value of fawning over like, oh, what Spider-Man should be and stuff. And I know I'm guilty of that, but that was mostly in the context of trash books year after year after year from Dan Slott. And that's why I was saying, even in the Prelude issue, which I didn't like, that I still appreciate Nick Spencer more than Dan Slott. Even little things in this book, like Spider-Man talks about his personal life and he mentions how he, Boomerang, and what's his face, the other roommate. Um, oh, it's right here. Oh, Randy, yes, who's dating a supervillain, and which is great. Like Nick Spencer's bringing back all these superior foes of Spider-Man villains, one dating one roommate, Boomerang being the other, and they have like a monster house pet, and they don't actually show up in this book, but even the reference to them made me happier. Yeah, that Mr. Bucks is saying Peter and MJ getting divorced would have been so much better than dealing with Mephisto. And then he said, "LOL." Yeah, like the thing about that too is, like, I'm sure yeah, I can think of a few examples in history, but it would have been really cool. And this is a weird thing to say. It would have been so cool for a big name superhero to get divorced. That's a weird thing to say, I realize, but think about how rare that is in like a lot of fiction. Like I said, it's happened before, like I think between Hawkeye and Mockingbird and a couple other characters like that, but it's kind of just referred to. But if that was the crux of the story, and it all happened around Civil War, where Spider-Man kind of made these horrible decisions and just like maybe like there's any number of things that they could have done and worked towards that showed why this marriage wouldn't have worked. So many things that could have been interesting about that. Uh, it would have been a really cool representation for people who have been divorced. And I say that as someone who's not experienced that at all, but lots and millions of couples have, and their kids have lived through that too. So I, there's a lot of frustration I have with One More Day. And it's funny that we're bringing it up, but to be fair, the book brings it up. Our friends here in chat aren't just pulling that out of nowhere and bringing it up because we're rehashing it. It's like pages of discussion within here from Spider-Man about, and he doesn't outright say it, but he directly alludes to like, oh, I was gonna ask her to marry me. I miss her so much. She's been in LA all this time. Things just aren't the same without her. And like I said earlier, it's all well written and didn't feel overly mopey. It made sense for his character and made sense why he's bummed out. But there was like, I don't know. it reminds us all of what changed the marriage between Mary Jane and Spider-Man naturally, and to this day, so many years later, it's still a point of frustration. And I think that frustration's real because even just me talking about it in chat kind of brought those feelings back up. And here I go rambling away. But yeah, okay. I think that's a good review though. So like I said, I recommend it under most situations if you're dead set against this particular arc of Spider-Man or this particular storyline. This might sell you on it, but if you've if you're against all this whole Spencer era of Spider-Man, this isn't going to change your mind. If you're against Since Rising, you'll probably like this book. So I do recommend you check it out in whatever form you can get your hands on. But I'm sure most stores will have plenty of copies for a while. Mine had so many. Well, I mean, it's just Wednesday now, so they'll run through it over the week. But that seemed like a particularly popular choice this week. Speaking of this week, this one's kind of an interesting one. I didn't really see any DC books that took my interest, and they didn't have a ton of releases coming out this week as far as I could tell, unless I missed something huge. So we won't be getting a lot of that. Fortunately, while Marvel is still putting out more books, we do not have another rainfall of Empire tie-ins. I think that would have exhausted all of us. But I do have one Empire tie-in, and that's X-Men number 10, a core X-Men book series that, fits right in with the X-Men books. So we'll talk about that next. I also have a couple of indie graphic novels, Empire number 3 coming up, and a few more Marvel surprises, I should say. Oh, actually, they are all X-Men surprises. Yes, so that was accurate. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time here on Comic Island. Oh, I did the thing again. Thanks, guys.